Good morning, everyone. It's Mr. Pierce. Today we're going to be talking about rounding decimals using a number line. Okay, in the first one we can see we are asked to round to the ones place. So the first thing we have to do is determine which digit is in the ones place. It is, of course, the 8. So that 8 is going to become my low number. My high number is going to be 1 more than 8, or 9. Halfway between 8 and 9, of course, we have 8 1/2, which as a decimal we write as 8.5. The next step is to place the actual number in the number line. So we have to determine, is 8 764 thousandths larger than 8 5/10 or smaller? It is, of course, larger because it begins with 8.7. Okay, so then we fill it in there. And now we just determine, is it larger than 8.5? Yes, it is, so we round it up to 9. In the next example, we are asked to round to the tenths place. The 7 is in the tenths place. So for our low number, we write all of the digits over to the 7, which would mean we write 8 7/10. To determine our high number, we take the 8 7/10 and of course add 1/10 to that, which would mean it would be 8 8/10 for my high number. The midpoint is going to be the number that is halfway between 8 7/10 and 8 8/10. One way we can determine that is to simply add a 0 on the end of each of these numbers. Now this 0 is temporary. We can then determine that halfway between 8 7/10 and 8 80/100 is 8 75/100. I'm going to go ahead and erase the zeros on the end and continue with my rounding. Okay, so the next step, we have to place the number 8.764, which is 8 764 thousandths into the number line. It is indeed larger than 8 75/100, so we put it right here, and it would of course round to 8 8/10. In the next example, we are going to round to the hundredths place. The 6 is in the hundredths place. So I'm going to write all of the digits over to the 6 for my low. So I'm going to write 8 76/100 for my low. For my high, I'm going to take the 8 76/100 and simply add 100th to that, which of course becomes 8 77/100. To determine the midpoint, there's a couple of things I can do. I can add a 0 in the thousandths on each of these, and then it becomes pretty obvious that halfway between 760 thousandths and 770 thousandths is 765 thousandths. So I can just write that in there. So 8 765 thousandths. I'm then going to erase the zeros on the end because really we're rounding to the hundredths. And now I'm going to plug in the actual number. Is 8 764 thousandths less than 8 765 thousandths? Yes, it is. So I'm going to plug it in where it goes, 8 764 thousandths, and we can see that it rounds to 8 76/100. In the next one, we are going to round to the tens place. That is, of course, a whole number. And what we notice that there is no digit in the tens place. So for our low number, we put a 0. For our high number, we are going to put 10. Our midpoint is going to be 5. 8.764 is larger than 5, so we would say this number rounds to 10. In the next one, we are asked to round the number 28 731 thousandths to the nearest 10. The digit that is in the tens place is the 2, so that is 2 tens. 2 tens is 20. So if 20 is our low, our high has to be 10 more than that, which would be 30. Our midpoint would be 25. So now we simply look at the number, 28 731 thousandths. It is larger than 25, so we place it in our number line where it goes, and we can see that this one rounds to 30. In the next one, we are asked to round to the ones place. The 8 is in the ones place. So for my low, I'm going to put all of the digits over to that 8, which means my low is 28 ones. My high is going to be one more than that, which would be 29. Halfway between 28 and 29, we would of course have 28 and a half, which as a decimal is 28.5. So now we plug in our real number, 28.731. It is of course larger than 28.5, so we plug it in here, and we can see that this one rounds to 29. In the next one, we are asked to round to the tenths place. The digit that is in the tenths place is the 7. So for my low, I'm going to write all of the digits over to that 7, which means 28 and 7/10. For my high, I'm going to add 1/10 to that. 28 and 7/10 plus 1/10 is 28 and 8/10. My midpoint is going to be the number that is halfway between those two. One of the ways I can determine that is to add a 0 on the end of these. And now I can see that halfway between 28 and 70/100 and 28 and 80/100 is 28 and 75/100. Now, because we're really rounding to the tenths, I'm going to take the zeros off these two numbers. And now I'm going to go ahead and plug in the actual number. 28.73 is less than 28.75. So I'm going to plug it in right here. And we would say that this one would round to 28 and 7/10. In the next example, we are asked to round to the hundredths place. The digit in the hundredths is the 3. So for my low, I'm going to put all of the digits over to the 3, which is 28 and 73/100. For my high, I'm going to add 100 to that. So that would be 28 and 74/100. To determine the midpoint, I can again add a 0 if necessary. Okay, and I can determine that halfway between 730 and 740 would be 735. So my midpoint is going to be 28.735. I'm going to eliminate or take off the zeros from the end of these two. And now I'm going to plug in my actual number. 28 and 731 thousandths is less than 28 and 735 thousandths. So this one will round to 28 and 73/100. For the next one, I am now going to round to the hundreds place. The digits that in the hundreds is of course the 8. So that 8 is equal to 800. So I'm going to write 800 for my low. My high is going to be 100 more than that, which would be 900. Halfway between 800 and 900 is of course 850. So now we just determine, is 828 and 731 thousandths smaller than 850? Yes, it is. So we plug it in, 828 and 731 thousandths, and we can see that this one rounds to 800. In the next one, we are going to round to the tens place. The 2 is in the tens place. So when I look at that, 828, I have to realize that that 2, if I write just 82, that does not seem to work out. So it's 82 tens. 82 tens is 820. So for my high, I'm going to go 10 more, which would be 830. Halfway between 820 and 830 is 825. So now we plug in our actual number. 828 and 731 thousandths is bigger than 825. So we can see that this one rounds to 830. In the next problem, we are being asked to round to the ones place. The digit in the ones is of course the 8. So my low number is going to be an 8. My high number is going to be one more than that, which is a 9. Halfway between 8 and 9 would of course be 8.5. So when I go to plug in the actual number, 8.984, we could easily determine that it is larger than 8.5. So we place it here and say that this one rounds to 9. For the last example for today, I am going to round to the tenths place. This problem was especially difficult for many students. The digit in the tens place is the 9. So for my low, I'm going to write 8 and 9/10. To determine the high number, the mistake that some kids made, and this is a mistake, so you just pay attention carefully. They said that, well, if I add 1 to 9/10, I get 8 and 10/100. That is simply not correct. Okay, because if I take off that 0, we can easily see that 8 and 1/10 is not larger than 8 and 9/10. So I'm going to erase this number. So what we should do is realize that I'm adding 1/10 to 8 and 9/10. When I do that, I have to regroup. So 9 plus 1 is 10. I write down the 0, regroup the 1. That ends up being 9.0. So my high number is 9.0. My midpoint is going to be the number that's halfway between those. That would be 8.95. So now I plug the actual number in, 8.984, and we can see that this one rounds to 9.0 or 9. I hope that you find this useful.